I've been a truck driver for over 15 years now, traveling across the country and seeing some of the most beautiful sights America has to offer. But there have been moments in my career that have left me with chills down my spine and a fear that lingers long after the incident has passed. One such incident happened just a few weeks ago, as I was driving through the desolate roads of Texas. I was on my way to Austin, a long haul that required me to pull over and rest for the night. I found a secluded spot next to the road, away from any civilization, and parked my truck for the night. As I settled into my bunk, I made sure to cover all the windows with thick curtains. The last thing I needed was the bright headlights of passing cars disturbing my sleep. I closed my eyes and tried to drift off into a peaceful slumber. But my peaceful slumber was short-lived. I was jolted awake by a loud banging on the side of my truck. My heart raced as I sat up, trying to make sense of what was happening. I could hear someone trying to open the doors of my truck, their hands fumbling with the locks. I reached for my phone, ready to call for help, but realized I had no signal in this remote area. Panic started to set in as I realized I was completely alone, with no one to turn to for help. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way to the front of the truck, hoping to catch a glimpse of the intruder. But as I shone the light through the curtains, I saw nothing but darkness. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was it a prank? Or was someone really trying to break into my truck? I decided to stay up for the rest of the night, keeping a close watch on my surroundings. But as the hours passed by, I saw and heard nothing. Exhausted, I finally fell into a fitful sleep just as the sun started to rise. The next morning, I reported the incident to the authorities, but they found no evidence of anyone trying to break into my truck. They chalked it up to a case of mistaken identity or a prank by some mischievous teenagers. But I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that lingered within me. I couldn't understand how someone could try to open the doors of my truck without making any noise. And the fact that I couldn't see anything outside my windows only added to the mystery. From that night on, I always made sure to park my truck in well-lit areas with other truckers nearby. I never wanted to experience that kind of fear and helplessness again. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that night. But one thing is for sure, I'll never forget the feeling of being completely vulnerable and at the mercy of an unknown entity. And I'll always be wary of pulling over in secluded areas, especially when I'm alone.
It was a dark and stormy night. I was driving through a deserted highway with no other cars in sight. The rain was pouring down heavily, making it hard to see the road ahead. I was exhausted and just wanted to reach my destination as soon as possible. As I was driving, I noticed a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a woman, drenched in rain, with her thumb out, asking for a ride. I hesitated at first, but then I thought, what harm could it do? I pulled over and she climbed into my truck. She was shivering and her clothes were torn. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She introduced herself as Sarah and told me that she had been stranded on the highway after her car broke down. She asked if I could drop her off at the nearest gas station. I agreed, and we started chatting. She seemed like a nice person, but there was something off about her. Her eyes were constantly darting around, and she kept fidgeting with her hands. As we were approaching the gas station, Sarah suddenly asked me to stop the truck. She said she needed to use the bathroom urgently. I pulled over and she got out. I waited for her for what seemed like forever, but she never came back. I got out of the truck and called out for her, but there was no response. I searched around, but she was nowhere to be found. Feeling uneasy, I got back into my truck and started driving again. But then I heard a loud thud on the roof of my truck. I thought it was just the rain, but then I heard it again and again. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw Sarah's face pressed against the window with a sinister smile on her face. I screamed and slammed on the brakes, but she was gone. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I was shaking with fear and my heart was racing. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But then I saw her again, standing in the middle of the road, blocking my path. I swerved to avoid hitting her, but I lost control of my truck and it crashed into a tree. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. The doctors told me that I had been found unconscious in my truck with no signs of anyone else being there. But I know what I saw that night. Sarah was not a normal person. She was something else, something evil, and I will never forget the horror I experienced on that dark and stormy night.
It was an ordinary night. I was headed to Southern California. The darkness was thick and the only light came from my headlights. I was exhausted and needed to rest, so I pulled into a rest area off the highway. The place was completely empty, which was unusual. Usually there were a few other trucks or cars parked here, but tonight it was just me. I shrugged it off and parked my truck, ready to get some shut-eye. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint sound of a barking dog. It seemed to be getting louder and louder as time went by. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a stray dog passing by, but the barking only got louder and more aggressive. I sat up in my bunk and listened carefully. The barking was now coming from right outside my driver's side door. I got up and looked out the window, expecting to see a rabid dog trying to get in, but what I saw was far worse. There, standing in the darkness, was a person, but it wasn't just any person. This person was growling and snarling like a wild animal, and their eyes were fixed on me. I could feel my blood run cold as I realized this was no ordinary person. I quickly locked all the doors and windows and sat in the driver's seat, heart racing. The person continued to growl and bang on my door, trying to get in. I could see their twisted face in the dim light, really creeping me out. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. I started the engine and hit the gas, not caring about the noise or the damage I was causing. I just needed to get away from that place and that person. As I drove away, I could still hear the barking and growling, but it eventually faded into the distance. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, where I called the police and reported what had happened. To this day, I have no idea who or what that person was, but I know for sure that I never want to encounter them again.
I was driving for Costco a few years back, delivering shipments to various locations for the holiday season. It was around this time of year when the air was crisp and the nights were long. I had been on the road for hours, but I was used to it. I was a fast driver and I took pride in my ability to get the job done efficiently. But that night, I got a call that would change everything. One of our locations in rural Kentucky needed a restock of giant Spider-Man dolls. They needed it urgently, and I was the only one available to take on the late-night duty. I loaded my truck and headed out on the 265, ready to get the job done. It was around 3 a.m. when I started to feel an eerie sensation. I chalked it up to exhaustion and popped a couple of NoDoz to keep me alert. But about 15 minutes later, the road started to fog up. And I don't mean a light mist, I mean thick, dense fog that made it almost impossible to see. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping that the fog would clear up soon. But as I sat there in silence, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. There were no other cars on the road, and I was ahead of schedule, so I decided to wait it out. But then, my truck suddenly went dead. No lights, no engine, nothing. I tried my CB radio, but there was no response. I checked my cell phone, but there was no signal. Panic started to set in as I realized I was completely stranded in the middle of nowhere. As I sat there, contemplating my next move, I started hearing sounds. It started off as a child crying, but then it slowly morphed into the sound of a woman crying. I couldn't see anyone around, but the sound seemed to be getting closer and closer to my truck. I was a big man, 6'3" and 250 pounds, but I was terrified. I refused to leave the safety of my cab, but I rolled down my window and asked if anyone needed help. The crying stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. And then I heard a sinister laugh. It sounded like it was directed at me, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I quickly rolled up my window, but the laughter only seemed to get louder. It was as if it was mocking me, taunting me. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the laughter stopped. And just like that, my truck started back up, and the fog dissipated. I wasted no time in getting out of there, driving like a bat out of hell until I reached the next truck stop. I ran to the bathroom and splashed water on my face, trying to calm my racing heart. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Did I really just experience something supernatural? I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had encountered something otherworldly that night. From that day on, I never took a late-night delivery again. And every time I drove past that stretch of road in rural Kentucky, I couldn't help but wonder if I had narrowly escaped something truly terrifying.